The wheelchair sat empty beside the dance floor, abandoned for just one perfect moment as David held his daughter in his arms, tears streaming down both their faces. The entire wedding reception had fallen silent, watching father and daughter share what everyone had thought impossible, a dance. But to understand how we got here, to this moment that would change an entire community, we need to go back to that rainy Tuesday when David Morgan first met Eliza Chen. If this story touches your heart, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more stories that remind us of the extraordinary power of human connection. David Morgan hadn't planned on being a single father. No one ever does. But life rarely follows our carefully constructed blueprints, and after his wife Sarah's sudden death 3 years ago, he found himself raising their 10-year-old son, Max, alone in a world that suddenly felt too large and too empty. David worked as an architectural engineer, designing buildings that would stand for generations while struggling to rebuild his own life day by day. Max was a quiet boy, intelligent but withdrawn since his mother's passing. He'd once been outgoing, the kind of child who made friends easily, but grief had turned him inward. David worried constantly, watching his son retreat further into himself with each passing month. The school counselor suggested activities, clubs, anything to help Max connect with other children, but nothing seemed to work. It was Max's science teacher who suggested the after-school robotics program. He has a natural talent for it, she told David during a parent-teacher conference. And he lights up when he's building something. I think it might be good for him. David had nodded, grateful for any spark of interest in his son's life, and signed the permission slip that same evening. The robotics program met twice a week in the school's science lab. David would pick Max up afterward, usually finding him hunched over circuit boards and computer screens, more animated than he'd been in months. On that particular Tuesday, rain pounded against the windshield as David pulled into the school parking lot. He was running late after a difficult meeting with clients, and the guilt of keeping Max waiting gnawed at him. He hurried through the school's empty hallways, footsteps echoing against the linoleum floors. When he reached the science lab, he found Max sitting beside a girl he'd never seen before. They were huddled over what looked like a small robot, and Max was actually smiling, a sight so rare these days that David paused in the doorway, not wanting to interrupt. The girl had long dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she was gesturing enthusiastically as she explained something to Max. What struck David most was how engaged his son looked, nodding and occasionally asking questions. It was the most words David had heard from him in a single sitting for months. "Dad." Max noticed him standing in the doorway. "Come look at what we built." David approached, noticing for the first time the wheelchair positioned next to the girl's chair. She looked up at him with bright, intelligent eyes. "You must be Max's dad," she said, extending her hand with confidence unusual for someone her age. "I'm Eliza. We're programming this robot to navigate obstacles. It's going to compete in the state championship," Max added, with more excitement than David had heard from him in years. "That's amazing," David said, shaking Eliza's hand. "I didn't know Max was working on a competition project." "He's really good at the mechanical design," Eliza said. "I'm better at the programming part. We make a good team." The science teacher, Ms. Winters, approached with a smile. "Eliza just transferred to our school last month. She's quite the computer prodigy, and she and Max hit it off immediately." David felt a surge of gratitude toward this girl who had somehow reached his withdrawn son when no one else could. "It's wonderful to meet you, Eliza. Will your parents be picking you up soon? It's getting late." A shadow crossed Eliza's face. "My mom's working a double shift at the hospital. She's a nurse. She'll be here in about an hour." "An hour?" David glanced at his watch. It was already past 6. "Does she usually work this late?" Ms. Winters interjected gently. "Eliza and her mom moved here for her mom's new position at Memorial Hospital. It's been an adjustment for both of them." David recognized the careful phrasing. Single parent, new to town, working long hours, he understood those challenges intimately. The rain continued to pound against the windows, and before he could think better of it, he heard himself say, "Max and I were planning to grab pizza for dinner. Would you like to join us, Eliza? We could drop you home afterward and save your mom the trip in this weather." The girl's face lit up, but then hesitated. "That's really nice, but..." She gestured toward her wheelchair. "Sometimes places aren't very accessible, and I don't want to be a problem." "Not a problem at all," David said firmly. "I'm an architect. Accessibility is part of my job." After a quick call to Eliza's mother to get permission, they were on their way. David watched in the rearview mirror as Max and Eliza continued their animated discussion about gear ratios and sensor calibrations. His son was talking, really talking, and something tight in David's chest began to loosen for the first time in years. The pizza place was indeed accessible, though David noticed the small ramp at the entrance was steeper than code should allow. He made a mental note to mention it to the owner, whom he knew from local business association meetings. As they settled into a booth, Eliza maneuvered her wheelchair with practiced ease. "So, you're new to town?" David asked as they waited for their pizza. Eliza nodded. "We moved here 2 months ago for Mom's job. She's a pediatric nurse specialist." "And your dad?" The question slipped out before David could stop himself. "It's just me and Mom," Eliza said matter-of-factly. "Dad left when I was 3, after the accident." David felt a familiar anger rise at the thought of another father abandoning his responsibilities. "The accident?" "Car crash," Eliza said, her voice steady. "That's how I ended up in this." She patted the arm of her wheelchair. "Mom says he couldn't handle it, but I think he was weak before that anyway." The straightforward assessment from someone so young startled a laugh out of David. "That's a very mature perspective." Eliza shrugged. "Mom doesn't sugarcoat things. She says understanding reality helps you deal with it better." "Your mom sounds very wise," David said. "She is," Eliza agreed. "Just really busy. That's why robotics is great, I can stay at school until she's done with her shift." The pizza arrived, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. David watched as Max and Eliza debated the merits of different pizza toppings with the kind of passionate intensity only 12-year-olds could muster. His son was animated, engaged, present in a way David hadn't seen since before Sarah died. When they dropped Eliza at her apartment, a modest unit in a complex on the other side of town, David exchanged numbers with her mother, Eliza Chen, who had just arrived home herself, still in scrubs and looking exhausted but grateful. "Thank you for bringing her home," Lynn said. "It's been hard finding our footing here." "Max and Eliza are working on a robotics project together," David explained. "They seem to make a good team." Lynn's tired face softened. Eliza mentioned a new friend, but she didn't say much else. "She's cautious about getting her hopes up." David understood immediately. Max is the same way. Since his mother passed, he's had trouble connecting with other kids. Something passed between them then, a recognition of shared struggle. "Perhaps they can help each other," Lynn said softly. On the drive home, Max was uncharacteristically talkative. "Eliza's really smart, Dad. She taught herself Python programming last summer, and she's already better than most of the high schoolers. And she doesn't treat me like I'm weird when I get really focused on something." "She seems like a special person," David agreed. "Her wheelchair doesn't slow her down at all," Max continued. "She says the only real problems are when places aren't built right, or when people treat her differently." David thought about his profession, about the buildings he designed. Had he ever truly considered the experience of someone like Eliza, beyond the minimum requirements of the building code? He wasn't sure, and that bothered him. Over the next few weeks, Eliza became a regular presence in their lives. The robotics team meetings expanded to weekend work sessions at David's house, where the dining room table became command central for their increasingly sophisticated robot. David found himself looking forward to these sessions almost as much as Max did. Lynn would sometimes join them when her shifts allowed, bringing homemade dumplings or scallion pancakes that made David realize how much he'd missed sharing meals with another adult. They'd sit in the kitchen, talking while the kids worked, finding unexpected common ground in their experiences as single parents. "It's not just the practical challenges," Lynn confided one evening as they washed dishes side by side. "It's the weight of being everything to someone. Parent, provider, emotional support, there's no one to tag in when you're running on empty." David nodded, feeling understood in a way he hadn't in years. "And the constant second-guessing. Am I doing enough? Too much? Making the right choices?" "Exactly," Lynn said, her shoulder brushing against his as she reached for another plate. "Eliza deserves so much more than what I can give her alone." "From what I can see, you're giving her exactly what she needs," David said. "She's remarkable, confident, resilient, kind. That comes from you." Lynn's eyes met his, and for a moment, something electric passed between them. Then Max and Eliza called from the dining room, needing help with a particularly stubborn gear assembly, and the moment passed. The regional robotics competition arrived faster than anyone expected. David and Lynn sat together in the bleachers of the high school gymnasium, watching as Max and Eliza guided their robot through a complex obstacle course. Their creation, which they'd named Pathfinder, moved with precision, navigating barriers and completing tasks with an efficiency that drew murmurs of appreciation from the judges. When they were announced as the winners, David wasn't surprised, but the pure joy on Max's face as he high-fived Eliza made his throat tight with emotion. His son was coming back to life before his eyes. The state championship was scheduled for 6 weeks later in the capital, a 3-hour drive away. The excitement of preparation was tempered only by practical concerns. "We'll need to stay overnight," David explained to Lynn over coffee. "The competition runs late, and I don't want to drive back in the dark with the kids." Lynn's face fell. "I don't know if I can get the time off. We're short-staffed, and I've already used so much of my leave time for Eliza's medical appointments." "Max and I could take Eliza," David offered. "I'll make sure the hotel has accessible rooms, and I've gotten pretty good at helping her when she needs it." Lynn hesitated. "That's a lot to ask of you." "It's not asking if I'm offering," David said. "Besides, they're a team. They should compete together." The gratitude in Lynn's eyes made something warm unfurl in David's chest. It had been so long since he'd felt truly needed by someone other than Max. The night before the competition, David found himself in a hotel suite with 2 excited 12-year-olds who were far too keyed up to sleep. Eliza had transferred from her wheelchair to the sofa, where she and Max were engaged in an increasingly competitive game of cards. "You're cheating," Max accused, laughing as Eliza revealed another winning hand. "I'm not cheating, I'm strategizing," Eliza corrected with a grin. "There's a difference." David watched them from the kitchenette where he was preparing hot chocolate. These moments of normal childhood, the teasing, the laughter, the uncomplicated joy, were precious. For both children, he realized, such moments had been all too rare. "Dad, tell Eliza about the time you designed that weird building with the spiral thing," Max said suddenly. David raised an eyebrow. "The Helix Center? You think that's interesting?" "It is interesting," Max insisted. "Eliza wants to be an engineer too." "Biomedical engineering," Eliza clarified. "I want to design better adaptive equipment. Most of it's still really clunky and medical looking. It should be functional and cool." David brought over the hot chocolate and settled into an armchair. "That's actually a fascinating field. The intersection of engineering and human needs. That's what you do too, right?" Eliza asked. "Buildings are for people." "They should be," David agreed. But I'm not sure we always design with all people in mind. The conversation shifted to architecture and accessibility, with Eliza offering insights from her perspective that made David see his profession in a new light. Later, after the kids had finally fallen asleep, Max in one bedroom and Eliza in the other, David sat alone by the window, looking out at the city lights and thinking about how unexpectedly his life had changed in just a few months. The competition the next day was intense. Teams from across the state had brought impressive robots, and the challenges were significantly more difficult than at the regional level. Max and Eliza worked seamlessly together, troubleshooting problems and making adjustments between rounds. David found himself holding his breath during their final run, when Pathfinder hesitated briefly before a particularly complex obstacle. "Come on," he whispered, and felt a hand slip into his. He looked down to see Lynn, who had managed to swap shifts at the last minute and driven up that morning to surprise them. "They've got this," she said, squeezing his hand. And they did. Pathfinder completed the course with the highest score of the day, earning Max and Eliza not only the state championship but also an invitation to the national competition in Chicago 3 months later. The celebration dinner that night was joyous. Even the restaurant staff got caught up in the excitement, bringing out a special dessert with "Champions" written in chocolate sauce. David watched as Max explained to the waiter, in detailed technical terms, how they had programmed Pathfinder's sensors, while Eliza added commentary about their strategy for the national competition. "They've come so far," Lynn murmured beside him. "Both of them." David nodded. "They've helped each other. And us too, I think." Lynn's eyes met his. "Definitely us too." The months leading up to the national competition transformed their lives in ways both subtle and profound. The two families fell into a comfortable rhythm, with dinners together several times a week and weekend outings that gradually began to feel less like arranged activities for the children and more like the natural movements of a larger family unit. David found himself redesigning his current project, a community center, with Eliza's insights in mind, going far beyond code requirements to create spaces that were truly inclusive. Lynn started taking one weekend day off consistently, prioritizing time with Eliza and, increasingly, with David and Max as well. The children's friendship deepened too. Max began learning about adaptive sports, eventually joining Eliza at her weekly wheelchair basketball practice. His natural athleticism translated well, and soon he was participating in scrimmages, playing from a sports wheelchair while Eliza coached him on technique. "It's harder than it looks," he admitted after his first practice, arms sore from propelling himself around the court. "Eliza makes it seem easy." "I've had more practice," Eliza said with a shrug, but her pride in Max's efforts was evident. David noticed other changes too. Max had started talking about the future again, making plans and expressing interests that extended beyond the immediate present, a significant shift from the day-to-day existence he'd been living since Sarah's death. And David himself felt more present, more engaged with life than he had in years. The night before they were set to leave for the national competition in Chicago, David invited Lynn and Eliza over for a special dinner. He'd spent the afternoon cooking, nothing fancy, just Sarah's old lasagna recipe that had always been Max's favorite, and setting the table with the good dishes that had remained unused since her passing. Lynn arrived with a bouquet of flowers and a bottle of wine. To celebrate before the big day, she explained, looking beautiful in a simple blue dress that David had never seen before. After dinner, while the kids were in the living room making final adjustments to Pathfinder, Lynn helped David with the dishes. The domesticity of the moment struck him suddenly, how natural it felt to move around the kitchen with her, the easy conversation, the comfortable silences. "Lynn," he said, setting down the dish towel. "I need to tell you something." She turned to him, her expression open but cautious. "What is it?"